A devoted mother is found dead from an apparent suicide.
Her body was in the bathtub. She had died from drowning. There was no other explanation for it.
They found a journal. She had been having some problems with depression.
But her loved ones aren't convinced.
She loved her family. She loved her job. She loved her friends.
Everything she did in her life was take care of her children.
Law enforcement isn't convinced either.
The fact that there was blood in the water, there was frothing in the mouth, I call it homicide. Your body's not going to let you kill yourself drowning in shallow water.
The investigation reveals a possible murder for hire.
A woman told them that her stepfather had hired a hitman to kill someone else.
They said, I need somebody to take care of her. He said, I know somebody who can help you.
At the center of it all is a woman with a personal vendetta, one that could endanger even more lives.
She had killed my mom. My life's probably in danger too.
We know her to be, however you define it, evil.
May 24th, 1992, Jackson, Mississippi. It's Sunday afternoon, and Richard Mosby and his new wife are dropping off his 2 young sons at their mother Gail's home.
Deborah and Richard had the boys, Bill and Joseph, for the weekend. They were 7 and 9. They were to return the children to their mother at 5 p.m.
We knocked on the door, my mom didn't answer.
Door's locked and it never locked. I was trying to figure out what's going on because my mom's car is right there.
I'm so young, I'm not thinking anything's... You don't go there when you're that age. But I got the sense that Bill understood something was wrong.
Richard's wife, Deborah, leaves a note on Gail's car, and they ask the next-door neighbor to call if they hear from her.
About 6 o'clock, the neighbor was concerned because Gail was very responsible. There was some reason why she would not be there. So he had a key, and he went into her home to look for her.
Everything seemed orderly in the house, which was consistent with the way she did things. She was apparently a neat housekeeper, but everything appeared to be in order.
At least until he reached the main bathroom.
And he was horrified to find that she was in her bathtub, and Gail Mosby was dead.
She was unclothed. Her body was in the bathtub with her feet hanging outside the bathtub. Her head was still underwater. She had died from drowning. There was no other explanation for it.
Gail's neighbor immediately calls 911. Police and paramedics arrive on the scene minutes later.
When the police arrived, they noticed no sign of a struggle. They didn't see anything being disturbed. They found her clothes had been folded and left by the bathtub. They also found a journal. Also, they did find some prescriptions. I can't specifically recall what they were, but the kinds of things you would expect somebody who had been depressed to have been prescribed. You put that package together, that kind of tips you over towards suicide.
But before that determination can be made, police must do a full evaluation of the scene.
That evening, I was just on active patrol, and I got the call of a deceased subject at that location. And there was no signs of any disturbance, any foul play. I did notice that one of her legs had a small bruise on the inside of her left ankle. I could tell there was frothing from the mouth, and there was a small amount of blood in the water, which would indicate the lungs were struggling for air.
To an experienced officer, something immediately stands out.
The thing that got me is the fact that the water was shallow. Your body's not going to let you kill yourself drowning in shallow water. Your body's going to fight. It's not going to let you drown in inches of water. Normally, I probably would not have even called the homicide detectives out. But the fact that there was blood in the water, that there's just inches of water in the tub, I called homicide.
They thought that my mom had committed suicide. I never believed that for a second. My mom valued family the most in life. I knew something happened to her.
Gail Petkovzak was born September 13, 1952, in Natchez, Mississippi. She was one of 3 sisters raised in a devoutly Catholic home.
My grandparents, Frank and Jackie, had 3 daughters, Gail, Lisa, and Jackie. Gail was the eldest. My mom is Lisa. She was the middle child, and then Jackie was the baby.
They were a loving household. My grandparents understood that, you had to work hard to be able to appreciate the fun things in life.
My Aunt Gail growing up, they always described her as very studious. She was very, very intelligent. She graduated as salutatorian of her high school.
When my mom graduated from high school, she went to Northwestern to study to become a nurse.
Post-graduation, she became a very successful NICU nurse, where she took care of the tiniest and most fragile little babies and enjoyed her job immensely.
By her late 20s, Gail had a thriving career in Jackson, Mississippi, and she was ready to start a family of her own.
My mom and dad met when my Aunt Liz, who worked with my mom, introduced them.
Richard Mosby was from Canton, Mississippi. He was referred to as happy or smiley. He always had a big smile on his face.
Richard's fun-loving nature was the perfect complement to Gail's ambition. After a brief courtship, they decided to tie the knot.
My parents were married in 1981. They had my brother Bill in 1982, and then I was born in 1985.
They appeared to be very happy, very much in love, and Gail was happy to finally have found someone.
To support their growing family, Richard started a tire business in Hammond, Louisiana. He and Gail bought a house there and settled into their new life.
My first memories of life were growing up in Hammond. My dad was a great dad, and my mom was a great mom. I felt loved by both of them.
My father had a family tire business in Canton, Mississippi that was fairly successful. And I think my dad wanted to try to duplicate that. But unfortunately, the business failed.
Gail continued to work as a nurse, but 2 children and rent payments were too much to afford on one salary. So she and Richard made the difficult decision to move back to Jackson.
When they moved back, Richard went back to work, I understand, for the tire company. He was not making the money he had made prior. There was a lot of stress.
The failure of the tire business and the strain economically that it put on my family ended up leading to them divorcing.
My parents got divorced in 1986, but they still got along great. I mean, it was a happy family still. It's just that they weren't married.
Following the divorce, my mom had full custody and my dad had every other weekend.
They got along better post-divorce than they did when they were married. They were very amicable.
2 years later, Richard remarried, but Gail remained single. For her, motherhood came before everything else.
My mom's greatest aspiration was to be able to see me and my brother successful. and grow up to be the best we could be.
I don't know how my mother could be as patient as she was with me. That's what made my mother such a great mother, is how much I sensed that she cared about me.
After being a single mom for 6 years, Gail has been found dead in her bathtub of an apparent suicide. Her journal, found at the scene, offers a potential reason for why she would end her own life.
She had been having some problems with depression at the time. It describes a very unhappy breakup with the woman she had been having apparently pretty long-term relationship with.
I never really knew that they were dating at the time, my mom and her girlfriend, but I still remember my mom on the couch after they had broken up, crying and just being very, very affected by this breakup.
In Mississippi, in the early 90s, having a homosexual relationship would have been a very troubling thing to do in terms of societal acceptance. That would cause someone to have a hard time expressing their heartache.
Mississippi's still a conservative state, and there still is a stigma among certain people, and the climate at that time, a relationship would have been defined a lot differently.
Even with that potential motive, not everyone on scene that day is convinced that Gail Mosby chose to end her life.
There was just something amiss, and it's that old police gut feeling that something was wrong. Everything was just too damn neat. It almost looked staged. There's something we're missing here, and I can't put my finger on it.
Coming up, investigators hear about a personal grudge.
She was very nasty towards my Aunt Gail. She did not like her.
And an informant agrees to wear a wire.
It does establish that they were in the house when Gail died, and they weren't there for honorable purposes.
On the night of May 24th, 1992, with several questions lingering about single mother Gail Mosby's apparent suicide, Jackson police send homicide detective Al Ledoux to the scene.
He was a great detective, and he paid attention to detail. He immediately started working as a murder. There was a possibility that maybe she took some meds, had a bad reaction, but you got to explore all possibilities. There's absolutely nothing that would indicate anything was wrong other than there was a dead woman in the bathtub. He and I both just knew there was just something we were missing, but we didn't know what it was. And he was going to find it.
He looked around a lot and did not see anything turned over, no indication that anybody had tried to break in a window or the door. But he did happen to notice that there was a framed picture. The glass was cracked.
The more I looked at it, the more I got suspicious of it. And so was the lead detective. He and I, we just said, there's something wrong.
Investigators look to the coroner to confirm their suspicions.
The crime scene's mine. The homicide case is the homicide detectives, but the body belongs to the coroner.
As part of his duties, he pronounced her deceased and, looked at the scene, and there was nothing to indicate foul play.
There was a small abrasion on her nose, but nothing that indicated that anybody had beaten her into an unconscious state and put her in the bathtub.
The coroner rules Gail's death accidental.
I said, really, can you really drown in this bathtub? And his word was to me exactly this. He said, you can if I say you can. And I knew then, okay, this is where it's going to go. He and I got along up until this point, all the years we worked together. But I thought it was a bad judgment call on his part. And he wasn't willing to look at any other options. And for some reason, he dug his heels on this particular case due to the fact that the lead and I both felt that there was something wrong. We put on our offense report there was a death pending, and that left the door open for us for further investigation.
For now, their next step is informing Gail's immediate family of her death by apparent suicide. Ex-husband Richard is left the grim task of delivering the news to their children.
He said, look, we got to tell you something. Your mom's dead. And I said, you're joking. Well, then my dad started crying, and then I knew. And I collapsed. And I don't ever remember getting up.
Even at that age, I understood what suicide was. So to have someone tell me that my mom committed suicide was just the most absurd thing that I could think of.
As investigators contact more of Gail's family about the circumstances of her death, her loved ones say it's more likely someone did this to her.
2 weeks prior to her death, Aunt Gail called my mom and was worried that something was going to happen. And she said she didn't feel safe. My mom, as a sister would do, tried to reassure her, I'm sure everything's going to be fine. But my mom had to go, so she cut the conversation short. And unfortunately, that was the last time she spoke with her.
Her sister suspects Gail's concerns had something to do with Richard and his new wife, Deborah. She says tension has been growing between them since Deborah and Richard got married 4 years ago.
After the divorce, Aunt Gail and Uncle Richard, they were very amicable, co-parented very well. After Debbie came into the picture, the parenting dynamic changed a little bit.
Debbie was married before she met my dad. She had 2 children. One of them did not survive infancy. And after my dad and Debbie got married, they had a daughter, Sarah. Debbie treated my brother and I tremendously different than the way she treated Sarah.
Debbie and my father's relationships sort of made us a little bit more secondary. It was now this third party that controlled what we were going to be doing.
All of a sudden, my mom and my dad, they started having custody battles. They're in and out of court. There's alimony disputes, and it was clear that Debbie was the one spearheading those problems.
Gail's family tells police that Deborah resented any reminders of Richard's life before her.
She didn't even like the fact that my Aunt Gail didn't change her last name post-divorce. Aunt Gail simply stated it was because that was her boy's last name, but I know it very much was a problem for Debbie.
There couldn't be a more striking difference living with my dad and Debbie versus living with my mom. My mom was loving. Living with my dad and Debbie, it was like a complete absence of love.
Debbie was very nasty towards my Aunt Gail. It was very evident that she did not like her.
Her utilities had been cut off. She had no proof who it was, but we all assumed, Gail and me and the police department, that it was coming from Debbie.
And investigators learned the situation had been a contributing factor to Gail's recent breakup.
Whatever relationship that Gail had with the woman, it ended because of all the drama that was involved in it.
But without evidence to support the idea of murder, there is little investigators can do.
In the absence of some information that indicated death by another identifiable person, there just wasn't anywhere to go with it. And so nothing really happened until the fall. In September, a woman who we now know as Vicki Mordecai went to the office of the FBI on a Sunday afternoon. And she was terrified. And what she said changed the investigation.
Months after the death of Gail Mosby, a woman approaches the FBI seeking protection in exchange for information about the case.
What Vicki Mordecai tells this FBI agent was that she and her husband, a guy named Ricky Mordecai, were in the business of raising marijuana up in northeast Mississippi, and that an entire crop had disappeared. They were in business with her stepfather, Roy Kyle. Roy Kyle was accusing them of having stolen the crop. She told them that her stepfather, she felt, was going to hire a hitman to kill her and her husband. And that she was terrified because she knew that he had hired a hitman to kill someone else previously. A woman in Jackson, Gail Mosby. She began to describe this scenario, this woman in the bathtub. They went over to this woman's house and killed her. She said in the course of it, something glass got broken. He looks at this set of circumstances and says, well, I don't know, this is a little too crazy. But he called the Jackson Police Department, Homicide and Robbery Division.
When Jackson homicide detectives hear about the broken glass, they immediately know Vicki is telling the truth, because that detail was never made public.
So the detectives said, I want to talk to her. So she came over there and, told him the story. And he says, from whom did you get this information? She told him that she had heard this from her sister, Debbie Mosby.
According to Vicki, her and Debbie's stepfather, Roy Kyle, was only the middleman.
Deborah said, I need somebody to take care of Gail. Can you help me with it? He said, well, yeah, I know somebody who might can help you.
What Vicki says that Deborah Mosby told her was that Billy Ray Ford, this hitman, had come over to their home. They lived in Canton, picked up her husband, Richard Mosby, and they drove over to Gail's house.
There was no sign of any forced entry because Gail thought she was only letting Richard in. And she didn't know Billy Ray was hiding behind the door.
Vicki says once the door was open, Billy Ray attacked Gail. And in the ensuing struggle, the picture frame shattered.
The murderer had covered her mouth and nose with a rag soaked with something until she was unconscious. And then he had taken her to the bathtub, poured the water till it got high enough and it drowned her.
When investigators run a background check on the alleged hitman Billy Ray Ford, they find a history of violence, including a past conviction for the attempted murder of the sheriff in Warren County, Mississippi.
It was reversed on appeal, so that was not a viable conviction to use against him. But, he was a known criminal element out there.
Detectives put out a bolo on Ford and turned their attention to Deborah Mosby.
We knew she was harassing Gail to the point of utter absurdity, just to get her to back off collecting the child support that she was certainly entitled to.
Deborah's history with Gail adds credence to Vicky's allegations and gives Jackson police enough to open an official investigation.
We believe at that point that Gail did not commit suicide. That did not happen. So, got to do something about this.
Coming up, a history of tragedies raises even more questions.
Couldn't get past the idea that we're talking about two people who drowned in a bathtub. It sure is unusual.
And investigators face a political battle to prove their case.
She was buried without an autopsy.
So we get an order to have Gail's body exhumed.
Richard and Deborah Mosby have emerged as the primary suspects in his ex-wife's murder. But for now, the only evidence detectives have comes from a confessed marijuana farmer. With more direct evidence needed, detectives ask both Ricky and Vicky Mordecai to wear a wire.
Ricky and Vicky get wired up. They go up to Richard and Deborah's house. Ricky and Vicky are still thinking that Billy Ray Ford has a contract to kill them. So they go there to talk to Deborah and Richard about how terrified they are, and can Deborah intervene and keep this hitman from coming to kill them just as he did Gail.
With investigators listening in, Deborah admits knowing Billy Ray, but denies hiring him to kill anyone.
What Deborah was talking about was not that she hired him to murder her. She hired him to go over there and scare her or rough her up or, just make her go away. The language is not the smoking gun we want, but it's helpful. It does, in fact, establish that Billy Ray Ford and Richard Mosby were in the house when Gail died.
After the sting operation, police subpoenaed Deborah's phone records.
About a month prior to Gail's death, one night, Deborah Mosby calls her stepfather, who happens to have connections with a hitman.
Roy calls Billy Ray Ford, who in turn calls Deborah, and then Deborah calls him back. To our knowledge, Deborah had never known Billy Ray Ford before she was put in touch with him by Roy Kyle.
Call logs show that in the month leading up to Gail's death, Deborah and Billy Ray spoke several times.
These people don't know each other from Adam's house, Cat, but they're having all these conversations. It looked pretty bad, smelled pretty bad, but did we really have it? Not so sure. So we indicted them for conspiracy to commit murder.
Authorities arrest Richard, Deborah, and Billy Ray without incident. The bizarre murder plot captures headlines throughout the region.
My father and Debbie, they were trying to tell us that it was my grandparents and my aunts, and they were out to get us. There's no truth to it. Whenever I found out that Debbie was also arrested, my initial thoughts were, this sort of makes sense. I didn't think that my dad would have done something like that. That wasn't who he was.
News of the arrests also reaches someone from Deborah's past.
Deborah's ex-husband, who was a guy named Mike McLean, he contacted me and told me some just horrendous things about her.
Mike tells authorities about a tragedy that occurred in May 1988 before his divorce from Deborah.
They had a child named Angel, and Angel was wheelchair bound. And then they had another small child. Mike told me that the wheelchair bound child was supposed to be watching the child in the bathtub, and the child drowned. Mike said that Deborah tried to blame the wheelchair-bound child for the negligence that caused that child to die.
Prosecutors can't ignore the similarities between the two incidents.
You couldn't get past the idea that we're talking about two people who drowned in a bathtub. It just kind of takes your breath away, doesn't it? Nobody ever could prove anything about that, but it sure is unusual.
Even with this new suspicious discovery, prosecutors aren't sure there's enough to get a conviction.
What you have to have in order to convict someone is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. We weren't there yet.
The DA's office continues to build its case, but their urgency increases when Richard and Deborah are released on bail.
They had custody of those little boys. I've never known that to happen.
Richard being the natural father, they went to live with Richard and Debbie.
Completely believing that Debbie had killed my mom. Now I'm living with her. I know that my life's probably in danger too.
Nearly 8 months after Gail Mosby was found dead in her bathtub, the two prime suspects in her murder, her ex-husband Richard and his new wife Deborah, have been released on bail. They've also retained custody of Gail and Richard's two sons, Joe and Bill.
My grandparents knew that Bill and Joe were being mistreated when they were in Richard and Deb's care, and they were doing everything they could to get custody of them.
Gail's parents ultimately prevail in the custody battle.
We moved to Baton Rouge and started living with my grandparents, which was just life-changing because now it's the first time that we've had some sense of normalcy since my mom was killed.
The prosecution, however, is still facing a major roadblock. Despite the evidence collected, the county coroner will not reverse his ruling that Gail's death was a suicide.
We knew that the cause of death was drowning, but we didn't have conclusive proof that the manner of death was homicide. She was buried without an autopsy.
One of the next things that we did was to get an order to have Gail's body exhumed and do an autopsy. One thing that we wanted to know was whether or not we could prove that she had chloroform in her system, but that was not successful. We couldn't prove or disprove that because the body was too decomposed.
The only way we were going to get this case is to call an outside pathologist.
My office hired Dr. Michael Biden, who is the premier forensic pathologist in the country. I tell him this whole story, and it was like he knew exactly where I needed to go. He said, go get your autopsy pictures. And so I did. And immediately he just zones in on this little bruise on her ankle. He knew exactly what had happened. But he said, you know, once you're unconscious, then you're not struggling anymore. They could take her unconscious body and pick her up by her ankles, place her in a body of water, and all they had to do was to get the water level over her nose.
Dr. Biden noticed abrasions on her nose, which is consistent with a rough cloth, like a towel being held over her nose. It was used to make her unconscious.
Dr. Biden said, this is not suicide. This is not an accident. This is a homicide. He made the same statement I did. You can't commit suicide in shallow water.
It didn't change the coroner's mind. He took the position that it was still a suicide and continued to do that.
He took the position that he was the coroner and that was the gospel, and there was no getting around it. To me, the victim was way more important than his ego.
Prosecutors hope that Dr. Boden's expert opinion will be enough to convince a jury. On October 10th, 1994, the joint trial of Deborah Mosby, Richard Mosby, and Billy Ray Ford begins.
Tommy and I decided that we would try the conspiracy to commit capital murder first.
As the state lays out its evidence for the conspiracy charges, one of the defendants decides to turn against the others.
It's not looking good to Billy Ray. So his lawyer comes over to counsel table and says, my client wants a deal, and he will agree to testify against Richard and Debbie, which is golden.
Ford's statement settles once and for all who the mastermind behind the murder really was.
He actually dealt with Deborah, who retained him, and she was the one he was talking to. Richard apparently pretty much did what Deborah told him to do.
It's the break prosecutors have been looking for. Now, they just have to convince a jury.
This was a case that had a lot of moving parts. The state never knows if there's going to be one person who just doesn't believe they proved their case.
With Billy Ray Ford agreeing to testify against Deborah and Richard Mosby, the couple's cases are severed. They will be tried separately for capital murder. In May 1995, the proceedings against Richard begin.
Richard decided to plead guilty to murder. So, of course, the death penalty was off the table at that point.
And it was a confusing time emotionally because as hateful and as angry as I was, the sense of relief was just overbearing. But it was very important to know that he pleaded guilty.
Prosecutors then turn their attention to the woman they believe orchestrated the crime.
The mastermind is Deborah Mosby, and we know her to be, however you define it, evil.
Debbie was the catalyst of this whole thing.
Deborah's trial begins in December 1995, 3 years after Gail's murder. The prosecution's star witnesses are the confessed hitman and a nationally acclaimed pathologist.
You can't discredit Dr. Biden. You can't do it. He's too good. He put the case together for us.
Deborah refuses to take the stand in her own defense, leaving state prosecutors to speculate on motive.
If Gail died, then the child support would stop. and that Social Security, which start for the boys, which I believe at that time was going to be $1,300 a month.
My impression was that she just didn't like Gail Mosby. In fact, I think she hated her. And she just decided her life would be better without her. And it was worth having her killed.
The jury convicts Deborah on all charges, but becomes deadlocked on recommending the death penalty. Instead, she receives a life sentence.
It was the final nail in the coffin in the sense of, wow, she's where she belongs. She's in prison, and now she can't hurt anybody else.
In 2007, Billy Ray Ford and Richard Mosby were released from prison. In 2021, Deborah was released as well, after serving 26 years of her sentence.
One thing I learned from Debbie's conviction and from my dad's sentencing is that life in jail doesn't mean life in jail. It's a huge gut punch knowing that they're out of prison. But I'll say this, based on how my grandparents raised us, it's made the anger that we had towards them, it's made it small. Because what we have, it's way more important. What keeps my mom alive to me today is the relationship that I have with my brother. Because she really instilled in us a sense of family, and we've never let that go.
I like to remind my own boys that, I was a product of one of the greatest mothers this world could have ever had. So I want them to be able to understand that.
The call lasted 32 seconds.
No screaming, no crashing.
No desperate plea for help. Just breathing. Uneven, controlled, almost as if she was trying to stay quiet, trying not to let someone hear her fear. Then a whisper. I think he's here. A pause. A faint sound in the background, too soft to understand, too deliberate to ignore. And then, the line went dead. Florida, 1995. A coastal town where nights were slow and predictable, where the loudest thing after midnight was usually the ocean wind brushing against empty streets. The kind of place where nothing truly violent ever seemed to happen, where people believed danger belonged somewhere else. Until Lisa Carter disappeared. 23 years old, a college student balancing classes with late shifts at a roadside diner. Known for her routine, known for her reliability, known for the fact that she always called someone before going to sleep. Always. Except the last call didn't end the way it was supposed to. 10:47 p.m. Lisa clocks out. Surveillance cameras capture her stepping outside into the humid Florida night, tying her hair back, exchanging a quick smile with a coworker. Nothing unusual.
No tensión.
No sign that anything was wrong. Just another shift finished. She walks to her car.
Alone.
11:12 p.m. She arrives home. A neighbor later tells police she noticed the porch light flick on, a silhouette passing behind the curtain. Normal movement. Casual. Unaware. Inside, everything continues as expected. Shoes placed near the door. Keys dropped onto the small wooden table. A kettle filled. A routine so ordinary it almost feels rehearsed. 11:38 p.m. The call. Lisa dials her best friend. The same number she calls almost every night. The same ritual before sleep. But something is different. Her voice is quieter, slower, as if she's choosing every word carefully. Then that whisper. I think he's here. Not someone. Not there's a noise. He's here. A presence already inside. And then silence. By the time police arrive, the apartment is intact. No forced entry. No broken locks.
No shattered windows.
Nothing looks disturbed. And yet everything feels wrong. A A cup of tea sits on the table, still warm, steam barely visible, curling into the air. A book lies open, its pages bent mid-read. The television hums softly in the background, casting flickering light across an empty room. Lisa is gone. No signs of struggle. No blood.
No overturned furniture.
Just absence. And the feeling that whoever took her didn't rush. They didn't need to. Investigators begin with the obvious. Neighbors are questioned. Doors knocked. Timelines reconstructed. One neighbor recalls hearing something around 11:30 p.m. Not a scream. Not a cry for help. Just a dull sound, like something heavy being moved across the floor. Another reports a car idling outside. Engine running. Lights off. Dark-colored. Possibly a sedan. No license plate remembered. No clear description of the driver. Just another fragment. Another piece that doesn't quite connect. Police comb the area. Search teams sweep through nearby woods, drainage canals, empty construction sites. Helicopters circle overhead. Volunteers distribute flyers with Lisa's photo. Bright eyes, a confident smile, frozen in time before everything changed. Days pass. Then weeks. Nothing. The trail doesn't just go cold, it vanishes. And that's what unsettles investigators the most. There's no escalation, no demand, no ransom call, no body.
No closure.
Just a single phone call echoing in a case file that keeps getting thicker, but never clearer. Then comes the first anomaly. Phone records. Detectives pull the log from Lisa's landline. That final call, her last connection to anyone, is analyzed repeatedly. At first, it seems straightforward. But under closer examination, something isn't right. There's interference. A faint click. Almost imperceptible. It happens just seconds before Lisa whispers her final words. Audio technicians enhance the recording, filter the static, isolate the frequencies. And what they find changes the direction of the investigation completely. A second line. Someone else was connected to the call. Not speaking. Not interrupting. Just there. Listening. The implication is immediate and terrifying. Whoever was in that apartment wasn't just physically present. They were connected. Prepared. Possibly monitoring her before she even picked up the phone. This wasn't random. This wasn't panic. This was control. Detectives begin digging deeper into Lisa's recent life.
Friends.
Family. Co-workers. Anyone who might have noticed something unusual. Nothing stands out.
No threats. No arguments.
No ex-boyfriends with a motive. No reports of stalking. But then a detail surfaces. Small. Almost forgettable. Until it isn't. A man. He had been coming into the diner where Lisa worked. Not every day. Not on a strict schedule. But often enough to be remembered. He always sat alone. Always in the same booth. Always ordered the same thing, coffee. Black.
No sugar.
He didn't talk much. Didn't engage. Didn't linger in conversation. But he watched. Staff remembered that. The way his eyes stayed fixed. The way he seemed more interested in observing than participating. Lisa had mentioned him once. Briefly. Said he made her uncomfortable. Not scared. Just uneasy. The kind of feeling people ignore. Until they can't. No one knew his name. He paid in cash. No credit card. No trail. And then, he stopped coming. The last time anyone saw him was the night Lisa disappeared. Sketch artists work from memory.
Tall. Thin.
Mid-30s, maybe. Dark hair.
Pale skin.
Eyes described as intense, the kind that didn't look away when they should. The sketch goes public. The response is immediate. Tip lines flood with calls. Dozens, then hundreds. Possible sightings. Similar faces. People convinced they've seen him before. But none of it leads anywhere. No confirmed identity.
No arrest.
Just another ghost added to the case. Months pass. Media attention peaks, then fades. Lisa Carter becomes a headline, then a segment, then a name people recognize but try not to dwell on. But inside the investigation, one thing refuses to fade. The call. Detectives keep returning to it. Replaying it. Analyzing every second. Every breath. Every sound. Because somewhere in those 32 seconds something is being missed. Years later, technology catches up. The recording is reprocessed using advanced audio enhancement tools unavailable in 1995. Layers of static are removed. Background noise is isolated. Frequencies sharpened. And slowly something emerges. A sound.
Soft.
Repetitive. Metallic. Not random. Not environmental. Rhythmic. Like something swinging.
A chain.
The discovery shifts the atmosphere of the case instantly. Because a chain isn't incidental. It's specific. It belongs somewhere. It means something. And it places the suspect closer than anyone had previously imagined. Then comes the final detail. The one that changes everything. Buried beneath the audio, almost indistinguishable at first. A second breath. Not Lisa's. Slower. Closer to the receiver. Close enough to be picked up clearly once isolated. Someone was standing near her. Inside that apartment. Listening as she made that call. Close enough to hear her whisper. Close enough to end it. The realization lands heavily. This wasn't an interruption. This wasn't an intruder caught off guard. This was presence. Calculated.
Silent.
Watching her before she even realized she wasn't alone. Which raises the question no one can answer. How long had he been there? Minutes? Hours? Long enough to understand her routine? Long enough to wait for the exact moment she picked up the phone? The apartment shows no signs of forced entry. Which means one thing. He didn't break in. He either had access, or she let him in. And that possibility fractures the investigation in ways no one expected. Because if she knew him, then everything changes. The quiet town, the normal routine, the safe assumptions, all of it collapses under one simple, terrifying idea. The danger wasn't outside. It was already inside. And for decades, that truth lingers. Unanswered. Unresolved. A voice trapped in 32 seconds of audio. A whisper that never finished its warning. I think he's here. And somewhere out there,
He still is.
the sound of the chain doesn't leave the room. It lingers. Not in the air, but in the minds of the investigators who now realize they didn't just miss a detail. They misunderstood the entire scene. Because chains don't belong in quiet apartments. They belong somewhere else. Somewhere industrial.
Confined.
Controlled. And suddenly, the question is no longer just who took Lisa Carter. It becomes, where's he planning to take her? The investigation reopens with a different tone. Not hopeful, not optimistic. Focused. Sharper. More dangerous. Detectives begin retracing everything that had once been dismissed as background noise, literally. Every recorded second of that 32-second call is broken apart again, slowed down, stretched,
Cleaned.
reconstructed. The breathing is analyzed. Lisa's quick, shallow, restrained. The second presence steady, measured, unafraid. That difference matters. Because fear leaves a pattern. And whoever stood behind her that night wasn't afraid of anything. Which suggests something even worse. He had done this before. Investigators shift their approach. They stop looking at Lisa's life as an isolated event and begin widening the scope. Similar cases. Unsolved disappearances. Women.
Young.
Routine-driven. Taken without struggle. Florida had seen them before. But never connected. Until now. Files are pulled from storage. Boxes reopened. Evidence re-examined under modern forensic techniques. Cases once labeled inconclusive are placed side by side. And patterns begin to form. A waitress in Tampa. Gone after a late shift. No forced entry. A college student in Jacksonville. Last call cut short. No signs of struggle. A receptionist in Orlando. Apartment left untouched. Personal belongings still in place. Different cities. Different years. Same silence. Same absence. And in two of those cases, audio existed. Voicemail recordings. Brief. Distorted.
Ignored at the time.
Now they're everything. Forensic audio teams compare them. Layer against layer. Frequency against frequency. And then, there it is again.
Faint.
Metallic. Rhythmic.
A chain.
The room changes when they hear it. Not because it's loud, but because it's consistent. 3 different cases. 3 different women. Same sound. Same pattern. Same presence. This is no longer a cold case. It's a series. And it's been hiding in plain sight for over a decade. Task forces are formed. Jurisdictions begin sharing data that should have been connected years ago. The narrative shifts from isolated disappearances to a coordinated hunt for something far more calculated. A predator. Methodical. Patient. Invisible. Investigators begin mapping timelines. Locations. Distances. The geography tells a story. Every disappearance occurs within driving range of major highways. Close enough to move quickly. Far enough to avoid repetition. He knows the roads. He knows how to vanish. And most importantly, he knows his victims. Because nothing about these scenes suggests force. No broken locks.
No defensive wounds. No chaos.
Which means one thing keeps resurfacing, no matter how much they try to avoid it.
He was invited in.
Or, at least, he wasn't stopped. That realization redirects the investigation again. Victimology becomes the focus. Lisa Carter, friendly, approachable, routine-driven. The others similar.
Polite.
Predictable, trusting. Not reckless. Not careless. But human. And humans open doors. Especially when nothing feels wrong. Detectives revisit the diner. Years have passed, but memory has a strange way of preserving discomfort. Former coworkers are tracked down. Interviews conducted again. This time with sharper questions. More pressure. And slowly something shifts. One server remembers the man differently. Not just quiet. Not just observant. But familiar. Not to her. But to Lisa. She recalls a moment, brief, easy to overlook. The man speaking. Not much. Just a few words. Lisa is smiling. Not forced. Not uncomfortable. Natural. Like she recognized him. That detail had never been reported. Because at the time it meant nothing. Now it changes everything. Investigators dig deeper into Lisa's past. Not just recent contacts. Everything. Old classmates. Former neighbors. Childhood connections. Anyone who might have crossed her path years before. And then a name surfaces. Buried in an old high school record. A transfer student. Briefly enrolled. Gone within months. No graduation photo. No yearbook mention beyond a single line. But someone remembers him. A teacher. Retired now. She describes him as quiet, detached. But not invisible. There was something else. Something she couldn't explain at the time. He paid attention. Not in class.
To people.
Specifically, to Lisa. The timeline doesn't prove anything, but it aligns just enough to raise a possibility investigators can't ignore. What if this didn't start in 1995? What if it started years earlier? What if Lisa wasn't randomly chosen,
But remembered?
The idea reframes everything. Because a random predator hunts opportunity, but someone who remembers.
Faites attention.
Background checks begin. The name leads nowhere at first. No current address. No active records. Almost as if he disappeared.
Or changed.
But then a break. A partial match in an employment database from the early 2000s. A warehouse worker. Temporary contract. Paid in cash. Left without notice. Security logs show late-night shifts. Minimal interaction. No incident reports. Except one. A complaint. Filed but never pursued. A coworker reported hearing metal sounds from a restricted storage area after hours. Management dismissed it. Assumed it was equipment. Now, it doesn't feel like equipment. Now, it feels like a memory trying to resurface. Investigators track the warehouse location. It's abandoned. Closed for years. The structure still stands, rusted and hollow. Inside, the air is stale. Heavy. Unmoved. Flashlights cut through darkness that hasn't been disturbed in a long time. And then, they find it. Not immediately. Not obvious. But there. In a corner sectioned off by old shelving. Bolted into the concrete floor. A metal ring. Attached to a length of chain. Corroded. But intact. The silence inside that space is different. It doesn't feel empty. It feels used. Forensics sweep the area. Collect samples. Dust. Fibers. Trace evidence long buried beneath time. And then comes the confirmation. DNA. Degraded. Partial. But enough. It matches Lisa Carter. The room stops breathing for a moment. Because for the first time in decades, Lisa isn't just missing. She was here. And if she was here, then he had a place. A system. A method. Which means he didn't just take her. He kept her. The implications spread quickly. Media doesn't have the full story yet, but inside the investigation, everything accelerates. Because now there's physical evidence. Now there's location. Now there's proof that the voice on that call didn't vanish into thin air. She was taken somewhere real. Somewhere that still exists. And maybe somewhere that wasn't the only one. Investigators expand the search radius. Look for similar properties. Old warehouses. Storage facilities. Abandoned sites connected to temporary employment records. Patterns emerge again. Always temporary. Always under the radar. Always leaving before questions are asked.
He doesn't stay.
He rotates. Moves. disappears, reappears, a ghost with a map. And then comes the most disturbing realization of all. The timing. The gaps between disappearances. Years apart. Not random. Intentional. Controlled. He doesn't act out of impulse. He waits. Plans. Selects. Which means something chilling sits at the center of the case. If the pattern holds, there are more. Unreported. Unfound. Unknown. And somewhere in that timeline, there's a next. Because predators like this don't stop. They pause. They adapt. They evolve. And the only thing more dangerous than a killer who acts is one who knows how to wait. Back in a lab, the audio is played again. That same 32 seconds. Now different. Now heavier. Because every sound has context. Every breath has meaning. And when Lisa whispers, "I think he's here," it no longer sounds like fear of the unknown. It sounds like recognition. Like realization arriving too late. And just before the line cuts, there's something else. Something missed before. A shift in the background. A subtle movement.
The chain.
Not swinging anymore.
Stopping.
As if someone reached out and grabbed it. Ending the motion. Ending the sound. Ending the moment. Ending her chance to be heard. And in that silence that follows, there's only one truth left. He was never hiding. He was always close enough to listen. The chain stops moving. That's what stays with them. Not the sound itself, but the moment it ends. Because something had to stop it. A hand. A decision. A presence choosing silence over motion. And in that silence, investigators begin to understand something far more disturbing than any noise could reveal.
Control.
Absolute control. The kind that doesn't come from panic. The kind that doesn't come from improvisation. It comes from repetition. From experience. From knowing exactly how much sound is too much. Back in a lab, the audio is no longer just evidence. It's a timeline. 32 seconds mapped into behavior. Lisa's breathing rises at second 14. The whisper comes at 26. The chain stops at 29. And the line dies at 32. 3 seconds. That's all it took. 3 seconds between realization and disappearance. 3 seconds where something shifted from hidden to unavoidable. Investigators freeze those final moments again and again. Not looking for new sounds. Looking for intent. Because in cases like this, intent leaves a trace deeper than fingerprints. And the more they listen, the clearer one thing becomes. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He acted when he decided the moment was over. Which means Lisa wasn't taken the second he entered that apartment. She was observed first. Measured. Waited on. And that changes the profile completely. This isn't a break-in. It's a rehearsal. Repeated enough times to become instinct. The task force begins constructing behavioral patterns. Not just where he goes, but how he thinks. He enters without force. He waits without being seen. He listens before acting. And when he moves, it's final.
No hesitación. No escalación.
Just execution. That level of control narrows the field. This isn't someone impulsive. Not someone chaotic. This is someone structured. Someone who understands timing, environment, and silence. Possibly trained. Or self-trained through repetition. Which leads investigators to one of the most unsettling conclusions yet. He's been doing this longer than anyone realized. The timeline expands again. Cases once thought unrelated are pulled in. Not just Florida.
Nearby states.
Georgia, Alabama, coastal routes, highway corridors, disappearances that never made national headlines, women who vanished quietly, files that never connected. Until now, analysts build a map, pins across years, across cities, across lives, and slowly, a shape emerges. Not random, not scattered. A loop. He moves in circuits. Returns to regions after time passes. Never too soon. Never too late. Just enough distance for memory to fade. For investigations to stall. For attention to shift. He doesn't chase opportunity. He creates it. That realization shifts everything again. Because if he plans this carefully, then he plans everything, including identity. The name from Lisa's past resurfaces. The transfer student. The one who watched. The one who left no trace. Investigators dig deeper into records that were never meant to be preserved this long. Old school archives. Handwritten forms. Administrative logs. And buried in fading ink. A partial address. Temporary housing. A rental that existed for less than a year. The property still stands. Barely. Weather-worn. Neglected. Forgotten by everything except time. Inside, the structure feels hollow. Dust thick in the air. Rooms stripped of anything personal. Except for one detail. In a back corner, a hook. Metal. Embedded into the ceiling beam. And beneath it, scratches. Faint. Repeated. Not random marks. Patterns. Something had been there. Something that moved. Something that left rhythm behind. Forensics process the scene. Not expecting much. Too much time has passed. Too much decay. But decay doesn't erase everything. It preserves what wasn't meant to last. Trace fibers. Microscopic residues. Fragments of presence. And, among them, a match. Not full. Not perfect. But enough. The same degraded DNA profile recovered from the warehouse. The same signature. Different location. Same pattern. He didn't just have one place. He had many. Temporary. Disposable. Controlled environments where sound didn't matter. Where no one was listening. Except him. The implications ripple outward. Because now, the chain sound isn't just evidence. It's a signature. A constant in environments he creates.
A tool.
A method. A ritual. And rituals don't appear overnight. They evolve. Which means earlier versions exist. Cruder. Less refined. Investigators dig into even older cases. Late 80s. Early disappearances. Less clean. More chaotic. But still.
Familiar.
Reports of strange noises. Metal. Movement. Victims who mentioned feeling watched. But never reported it. Because it never crossed the line into something actionable. Until it did. The profile sharpens.
Male.
Organized. Patient. Comfortable in controlled spaces. Prefers isolation. Avoids confrontation. Chooses moments where resistance is minimal. And most importantly, he doesn't leave witnesses. Except once. And even that wasn't intentional. Because Lisa wasn't supposed to be heard. That call,
Was a mistake.
a variable he didn't anticipate, or didn't stop in time, which raises a dangerous possibility. He adapted after that night. He learned. He adjusted his timing, his methods, his silence. And that's why the years that follow go quiet. Too quiet. No confirmed matches. No clear repeats. Just gaps. Long stretches where nothing surfaces. But investigators don't believe he stopped. Predators like this don't end. They refine, disappear,
Wait.
and return when conditions are perfect again. Which leads to the next phase of the investigation. Modern tracking, databases, employment records, driver's licenses, aliases, patterns of movement. Anyone matching the behavioral profile who moved through those regions during those years. Thousands of names, then hundreds, then dozens, and finally, a cluster. Men with transient work histories, short-term contracts, frequent relocation, minimal social footprint. Among them, one stands out. Not because he's obvious, but because he isn't. No criminal record, no flagged behavior, no history of violence.
Clean.
Too clean. A pattern of warehouse jobs, construction, night shifts, positions that offer access, isolation, and time. His name appears, disappears, reappears across years.
Different states.
Different employers. Always temporary. Always leaving before permanence sets in. Investigators begin surveillance. Quiet. Unannounced. Watching someone who has spent a lifetime avoiding being watched. His current life is unremarkable. A small rental.
Sparse interior. No personal declarations. No photographs.
Nothing that ties him emotionally to anything. Except one thing. In the garage.
A chain.
Hanging.
Clean.
Maintained. Not rusted. Not decorative.
Used.
Regularly. The sight of it lands heavier than any confession could. Because it's not hidden. It's not concealed. It's integrated. Part of his environment. Part of his routine. Which means he never stopped needing it. The question is,
why?
And for what? Investigators don't move yet. Not without certainty. Not without evidence that can hold. Because a man like this doesn't slip. He doesn't panic. He doesn't confess. He waits. And if they move too early, he disappears again. Back into the pattern. Back into the loop. Back into silence. So they watch. Track. Build.
Piece by piece.
Until the past and present align. Until the chain in the garage connects to the chain in the audio. Until Lisa's final 32 seconds become more than a memory. Become proof. Because somewhere between those breaths, between that whisper and that silence, there's still something left unfinished. Something he thought was buried. Something he believed time had erased. But time doesn't erase patterns. It reveals them.
Slowly.
Relentlessly.
And now,
for the first time in decades, the distance between the voice on that call and the man who ended it is closing. They don't move on him. Not yet. Because men like this don't break under pressure. They dissolve. They disappear. And if he senses even the smallest shift in the air, If instinct whispers that something is wrong, he won't panic. He'll vanish. So they watch. Days stretch into weeks. Unmarked vehicles rotate in quiet patterns. Lenses stay trained from distances that feel safe, but never certain. Every movement logged. Every routine mapped. He leaves the house at irregular hours. Not chaotic. Intentional. Sometimes early morning. Sometimes past midnight. Never predictable enough to form a simple pattern, but not random either. Controlled irregularity. Another layer of discipline.
He shops rarely.
Small quantities.
No excess.
No signs of a life built around comfort. He speaks to no one. Neighbors describe him the same way they describe an empty house. He's just there. Invisible without trying. Present without impact. And that's what unsettles investigators the most. Because invisibility like that isn't accidental. It's practiced. Inside the garage, the chain remains. Always in the same position. Always clean. But something changes. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But enough for those who have spent years studying details that others miss. It moves. Slightly. The angle shifts between observations. A few degrees. Then a few more. At first, it seems meaningless. But then the analysts start comparing timestamps. Dates. Movements. And a pattern begins to surface. The chain doesn't move every day. It moves on specific days. Spaced apart. Measured. Deliberate. Like something is happening in between. Something not visible from the outside. That realization tightens the atmosphere around the case. Because it suggests activity. Not memory. Not habit. Active use. And if it's active, then the timeline isn't just about the past anymore. It's about now.
Investigateur expand surveillance.
Thermal imaging. Night observation. Tracking every entry and exit. And then, the first anomaly.
2:13 a.m.
He leaves.
No lights. No hesitation.
He walks to his vehicle, opens the trunk, pauses for exactly 3 seconds, then closes it again. Empty-handed. Or so it seems.
He drives.
They follow. At a distance that feels too far and too close at the same time. Highway. Exit. Secondary roads. Then deeper. Into areas that don't appear on routine patrol routes.
Industrial zonas.
Abandoned stretches. Places where sound doesn't travel far.
He stops.
An old structure. Collapsed fencing. A building that should have been demolished years ago but somehow still stands. He doesn't go inside. He circles it once. Slow. Observing. Then he leaves. No entry.
No visible interaction.
Just presence. The behavior is unsettling. Because it mirrors something investigators have already seen. Repetition without action. Observation before movement. The same pattern that existed before Lisa disappeared. Which means something is building. Something is being prepared. And they're watching it happen in real time. Back at the command center, the debate shifts. Wait longer or intervene early. There's no easy answer. Because acting too soon risks losing everything. But waiting too long risks something worse. Another voice. Another 32 seconds. Another silence. They decide to push further.
Quietly.
Forensics teams begin analyzing his waste disposal. Trash recovered. Sorted. Examined. Nothing obvious.
No biological material. No trace velrecede.
Just controlled absence. Until one item stands out. A receipt. Crumpled.
Half torn.
From a hardware store. Date recent. Items listed. Industrial hooks. Reinforced bolts. And chain lubricant. The room stills. Because now it's not just observation. It's preparation. And preparation means intent. Investigators accelerate. Search warrants begin forming. Legal thresholds being crossed piece by piece. But they still need one thing. A direct link. Something that ties him not just to behavior, but to Lisa. Back in the lab, the audio is revisited again. Not for sound this time. For timing. Every second aligned with movement patterns observed now. And then, a realization. The pause before the chain stops. It's not random. It's responsive. It happens immediately after Lisa whispers, "I think he's here." As if he heard it, understood it, and reacted. Which means he wasn't just present. He was listening closely enough to respond in real time. That level of awareness suggests proximity that goes beyond physical. It suggests familiarity, comfort,
Confidence.
and confidence leaves openings. Because over time, confidence becomes routine. Routine becomes repetition. And repetition creates mistakes. The next one comes 3 nights later.
12:41 a.m.
He leaves again. This time with something in his hand. Not large.
Wrapped. Difficult to identify.
He drives a different route. Longer. Less direct. But they follow. Careful. Measured. He reaches another location. Smaller. More concealed. A storage unit facility. Closed at that hour. Or, at least, it should be. He enters using a key.
No hesitation.
Inside, lights flicker on briefly. Then off. Minutes pass. Too long to be nothing. Too short to be extensive. When he exits, his hands are empty. The object is gone. Left behind. The implication hits instantly. He has more than one place. More than one environment. And at least one of them is active. A warrant is fast-tracked. Quiet entry authorized. By dawn, investigators are inside the unit. The air is different. Colder. Heavier. Like space that has been closed for too long. And then, they see it. Another chain. Suspended. Centered. Prepared. Not old. Not abandoned. Maintained. The floor beneath it.
Scuffed.
Repeated marks. Circular. Movement. And on the ground, a small object. Almost overlooked. A piece of fabric.
Light. Worn.
Tested within hours. DNA. Not Lisa.
New.
Recent. The silence that follows is heavier than anything before. Because it confirms the one thing they were trying not to say out loud. He didn't stop. He never stopped. And whatever pattern he follows, it's happening again.
Right now.
The case shifts from investigation to prevention. Time is no longer an advantage. It's a threat. Because every hour they wait is another hour he prepares. Another hour someone disappears without anyone noticing. Back in the surveillance room, his image plays again. Frame by frame. step by step. And suddenly, something stands out. A detail too small to notice before, but impossible to ignore now. His hand. When he walks. A subtle movement. A habit. Like he's gripping something that isn't there. Or used to be. Repetition without object. Memory in motion. The kind of habit formed not from thought, but from action repeated too many times. Investigators don't say it. They don't need to, because the conclusion is already there. This isn't escalation. This is continuation. A cycle that never ended. A pattern that only paused long enough to become invisible again. And now, it's visible. Too visible. Which means the window is closing. For him. Or for whoever comes next. Because somewhere between the chain that stopped in that apartment and the chain now hanging in that storage unit, there's a line that hasn't been crossed yet. But it will be. Unless they stop him first. And this time, there won't be a phone call. There won't be a warning. Just silence. Again. They don't wait anymore. The window has closed. Whatever patience they built over weeks gone. Because now there is proof. Not just of the past, but of the present. A chain that isn't rusted. A room that isn't abandoned. A trace that isn't old. And somewhere beyond that, a life that may still be ticking down in silence. The order is signed before sunrise. Quiet entry.
No sirens. No warnings.
No room for hesitation. They move just before dawn, when darkness is thinning but the world hasn't fully woken yet. The kind of hour where mistakes are made by those who think they're alone. The house looks the same.
Still.
Unremarkable. Like nothing inside it has ever mattered. They breach fast. Controlled.
Clean.
Doors forced. Rooms cleared. Voices low. Weapons steady. Every step measured. But the first thing they notice is the silence. Not the normal kind. Not the empty kind. A silence that feels prepared. Like something has already left. The living room bare. Kitchen untouched. Bedroom, minimal, almost staged. No signs of struggle. No signs of panic. Just absence again. The same absence they saw in Lisa's apartment. The same stillness that doesn't come from chaos, but from control. They move to the garage. The chain is there. Exactly where it always is.
But now.
It's different. Not in position. In condition. There's something on it.
Fresh.
Barely visible unless you're looking for it. Forensics step in immediately. Swabs taken. Samples secured. No one speaks. Because they already know what they're about to confirm. Inside the house, something feels off. Not missing. Too clean. Drawers opened. Closets checked. Every surface scanned. And then, they find it. Hidden in plain sight. A small compartment beneath the floorboards in the bedroom. Not locked. Not sealed. Just placed. Like it wasn't meant to be discovered quickly. But eventually. Inside. Photographs. Dozens. Different women. Different locations. Different years. None smiling. None aware. All taken from a distance. Watching. Tracking. Selecting. Lisa is there. Near the bottom. One photo. Outside the diner. Laughing. Unaware of the lens that had already chosen her. The room tightens. Because this isn't impulse.
This is cataloging.
This is memory preserved. This is someone who doesn't forget. Under the photos. A notebook.
Plain.
Unmarked. Inside.
Dates. Coordinates.
Short entries. Minimal words. Observed. Routine confirmed. Alone. And then, a pattern. Intervals. Not random. Not emotional. Structured. Calculated. Each entry leading to a blank space. A gap. A disappearance. But the last entry is different. Not complete. Not closed. Just one word. Ready. Dated 3 days ago. The realization hits all at once. They weren't just watching the past. They were watching the build-up to something new. Something that hadn't happened yet.
Or
Had just begun. The suspect is gone. No sign of forced exit.
no raz departure.
Just absence. Again. But this time, it's different. Because now they know. He knew.
He saw something.
Felt something. A shift in the air. A break in the pattern. And he moved before they could. Which means one thing becomes dangerously clear. They weren't ahead of him. They were catching up to where he used to be. The investigation flips instantly. From capture to pursuit. APBs issued. Routes analyzed. All known patterns reactivated. Highways. Backroads.
Industrial zonas.
Places he's used before. Places he might return to. Because men like this don't improvise under pressure. They fall back on what they know. And what he knows is movement. Temporary spaces. Controlled environments. But there's something else now. Something new. Because of that final entry. Ready. It suggests escalation. Not repetition. Something planned. Something bigger. And if that's true, then this isn't about one victim anymore. It never was. Back in the lab, results from the garage chain come in. Confirmed. Human DNA. Recent. Not Lisa. Not from any known previous case. Unidentified. But present. Alive in the system now. Which means the timeline isn't hypothetical anymore. It's active. Somewhere. Someone is missing. And they don't even know it yet. The media hasn't caught up. No reports.
No alerts.
Just a gap waiting to be filled. Investigators cross-reference recent missing persons. Nothing immediate. Which is worse. Because it means the window is still open. The event hasn't been discovered. The disappearance hasn't been noticed. And that gives him time. Time to move. Time to erase. Time to reset. But there's one mistake he couldn't erase. The notebook. Because inside those coordinates, there's a future. A location tied to that final word. Ready. They trace it. Map it. And it leads to somewhere new. Not abandoned. Not isolated. Something else. A residential area. Quiet. Normal. The kind of place where nothing seems wrong. Until it is. They move again. Faster this time. No waiting. No extended surveillance. Because now it's a race. Not against him.
But against time.
They arrive just before nightfall. The house matches the coordinates. Lights off. Curtains drawn. No movement. But something feels wrong. Not empty. Occupied. Breathing. They breach.
Faster.
Harder. Inside. A struggle. Signs this time. Furniture displaced. Objects knocked over. The first real disruption they've seen in years of this pattern. And then, a sound. Faint. From deeper inside the house. They move toward it. Weapons raised. Heartbeats loud enough to drown thought.
A door. Locked.
Forced open. And inside.
A chain.
Hanging. Still moving. Slightly. As if it had just been released. But the room is empty.
No victim. No suspect.
Just motion fading into stillness. Again. The pattern repeats. But something has changed. Because this time, they were close. Too close. Close enough to interrupt. Close enough to alter the sequence. Which means one terrifying possibility rises above everything else. He's adapting again. Faster now. Sharper. Because now, he knows he's being hunted. And a predator that knows it's being hunted doesn't slow down. It evolves. The final detail comes quietly, almost overlooked. On the floor,
Near the chain.
a phone,
Old.
damaged, recovered carefully,
Powered on.
barely functioning. But inside, one file, a recording, 32 seconds. Not from 1995.
Now.
And when they play it, the room freezes. Because the sound is familiar. Too familiar. Breathing. Uneven. Controlled. A whisper beginning to form. And then,
Cut.
the same pattern. The same silence. The same ending. Only this time, it didn't belong to Lisa. And that means one thing. The past wasn't solved. It was repeating. Again. The recording changes everything. Because for the first time in decades, Lisa Carter is no longer the only voice connected to the darkness. There is another. Another breath. Another silence. Another moment where someone realized too late that they were not alone. The investigators sit in the room without speaking. The audio plays again. 32 seconds. A pattern they know too well. A victim's fear. A hidden presence. A final moment before everything disappears. But this time, there is one difference. They arrived before the ending. The question now is whether they arrived early enough. The phone recovered from the house becomes the center of the investigation. Every fragment extracted. Every file recovered. Every hidden detail examined. The device is damaged.
Old.
Almost discarded.
But someone wanted it there.
That is what bothers investigators most. The phone wasn't hidden. It was placed. Like a message. Like a challenge. The killer had left behind something impossible to ignore. A reminder.
A signature.
A statement. He wanted them to know. He wanted them to hear. And that means something inside his psychology has changed. For years, he disappeared into silence.
Now.
He is creating noise. That is dangerous. Because silence belongs to someone who feels safe. Messages belong to someone who wants control. The investigation turns toward the suspect's movements. Every camera. Every transaction. Every possible sighting. But the trail is already damaged. He prepared for this. No obvious escape route.
No rushed purchases.
No sudden activity. He doesn't run like someone afraid. He moves like someone who expected this day to come. And that changes the entire perception of him. He wasn't surprised. He was waiting. The task force revisits the notebook found beneath the floor. The dates. The locations. The observations. At first, they believed it was a record of past crimes. Now they see something else. A timeline. A progression. The early entries are simple.
Names.
Locations. Habits. But later entries become different. More detailed. More personal. Almost emotional. Not because he cared. Because he studied. The victims weren't random selections. They were projects. Each one observed. Measured. Understood. Before the first step was ever taken. And Lisa Carter was not the beginning. She was simply the first one who left behind a voice. That voice became the mistake. The evidence he couldn't erase. Investigators go back to 1995 again. But this time, they stop looking at what happened inside Lisa's apartment. They look outside. The neighborhood. The streets. The hours before the call. Because if he watched her before entering, someone else may have seen him. A forgotten witness. A detail buried under decades of assumptions. And then they find one. A retired delivery driver. He had never come forward because he didn't think what he saw mattered. On the night Lisa disappeared, he was driving through the neighborhood. Around 11:20 p.m. He remembered a vehicle. Parked near Lisa's apartment. Not the same dark sedan reported before. Another vehicle. Older.
White.
A small mark on the rear bumper. At the time, it seemed meaningless. Now, investigators search registration records from 1995. Thousands of vehicles. Thousands of owners. Until one name appears. A temporary owner. A man who sold the vehicle less than a year later. A man whose records connect to the warehouse employment history. The same network. The same disappearing pattern. The name finally begins to solidify. For decades, he was just a shadow. A possibility. A theory.
Now.
He has a face. A history. A trail. But the deeper they dig, the stranger it becomes. Because his official life looks ordinary.
Too ordinary. Jobs.
Rentals. Paperwork.
No arrests.
No violence. No obvious warning signs. The perfect camouflage. A person who built a normal life around abnormal behavior. And that is what makes him dangerous. Not that he looked like a monster, but that he didn't. Neighbors describe him as polite. Quiet. Helpful when necessary. The kind of person people forget moments after meeting. Exactly the type of person who survives by being forgotten. But one former coworker remembers something different. Something small. A conversation years earlier. A joke. A comment. The man had once said, "People only notice what they expect to see." At the time, everyone laughed. Now, nobody does. Because that sentence reveals something. A belief. A philosophy. He wasn't hiding from people. He understood them. He understood what they ignored. What they dismissed. What they never questioned.
And he used that.
The task force begins preparing for a confrontation. But before they can move, another disappearance occurs. A woman reported missing less than 12 hours earlier. Same region. Same age range. Same routine. And investigators immediately recognize the nightmare. The pattern. It has started again. This time, there is no waiting. No cold trail. No decades passing. They move within hours. The woman's apartment is searched. Different from Lisa's, but familiar. No forced entry.
No había struggle.
A phone call. Interrupted. 31 seconds. Almost identical. The killer is repeating the method. But he made one mistake. A mistake caused by confidence. On the call recording, there is something new. Not a chain. Not breathing. A voice. Very faint. A word. A single word. And when analysts enhance it, everyone in the room goes silent. Because the voice isn't from the victim. It belongs to him. The first time he is spoken on record. The first real evidence of identity. The first crack in decades of silence. The word is unclear, but enough to recognize the tone.
Calm.
Controlled. Almost conversational. Like he isn't threatening. Like he is explaining something. That detail unsettles investigators more than anger would. Because anger is temporary. Calm is deliberate. This isn't a person losing control. This is someone who believes he has complete control. But every person who believes that eventually makes one mistake. And he has just made his. The audio team isolates the voice. Creates a profile. Compares it against old recordings. Employment interviews. Public databases. And then, a match. Not perfect. Not enough for a courtroom. But enough for investigators. Enough to confirm what they feared. The man they have been tracking is the man connected to Lisa Carter. The ghost finally has a name. The question is no longer who he is. The question is, where is he now? Because somewhere in the city, someone is still waiting. Someone is still missing. And the clock is moving. The same clock that began in 1995. The same clock that started with a whisper. I think he's here. But this time, they're closer. This time, he knows it. And for the first time in 30 years, the hunter is no longer invisible. He is being hunted. The hunter is no longer invisible. For 30 years, he survived inside the gaps. The missed details. The forgotten reports. The assumptions that nothing connected. He lived in the spaces between investigations, between jurisdictions, between moments when someone almost saw the truth but looked away too soon.
But now,
the gaps are closing. The name that once existed only as a shadow now appears on official documents. The face that lived inside sketches and theories now has a real identity. And for the first time in decades, investigators are not chasing a mystery. They are chasing a man. But a man who has spent his entire life preparing for this moment. Because the moment they identify him, he disappears. Again. The surveillance team arrives at his last known address before sunrise. The house is empty. Not abandoned. Empty by design. The refrigerator is clean. The closets are nearly bare.
no photographs.
No personal letters. No items that reveal attachment. It is not a home. It is a temporary location. A place to exist until it becomes unsafe. Exactly like every other place connected to him. Investigators search every room. And what they find confirms the fear that has been growing for weeks. He planned for departure. A hidden compartment beneath the floor. A small collection of documents. Multiple identities. Different names. Different addresses. Different versions of the same person. But the same face. The same handwriting. The same pattern. The man who disappeared from Lisa Carter's life in 1995 had been disappearing from everyone's life long before that night. He wasn't running from the law. He was running from being known. Inside the compartment, they find another notebook. Not like the first one. This one is newer. Cleaner. More organized. The earlier notebook documented victims. This one documents investigators.
Names. Dates.
Locations. Articles. News reports. He had been watching them. Studying them. Learning how close they were. The realization sends a chill through the entire team. Because this means something impossible. He wasn't only hunting victims. He was monitoring the people hunting him. For years. The investigation changes immediately. Every officer involved is reviewed. Every leak considered. Every piece of public information analyzed. Because if he knew they were getting close, how long had he known? Days? Months? Years? And then comes the discovery that answers the question. A newspaper clipping.
Old.
Yellowed. Folded carefully. The headline is from 2008. A story about the reopening of Lisa Carter's disappearance case after new audio technology revealed hidden sounds in the final phone call. The article had one sentence highlighted. The killer may have been inside the apartment. That sentence was underlined. Multiple times. He read it. He understood it. And he kept it. Not as a warning. As a reminder. The case that haunted him became something he carried with him. A trophy. A memory. A mistake he never believed could hurt him. But the investigation reveals something else. Something far more disturbing. He didn't just keep evidence from the past. He kept evidence from every stage of his life. Receipts.
Maps.
Photographs.
Notes.
Pieces of moments that should have disappeared. A private archive of control. And hidden among those items, a photograph of Lisa. Not from the night she vanished. Not from the diner. Earlier. Years earlier. Before 1995. A younger Lisa. Walking near her college campus. Taken from a distance. The room becomes silent. Because this changes everything. The obsession began before investigators thought it did. He wasn't attracted to a moment. He was attached to a memory. Lisa was not a random encounter. She was a long-term fixation. And suddenly, the entire case takes on a darker meaning. The night of the phone call was not the beginning. It was the conclusion of something that had been building for years. The investigators returned to old records. Old photographs. Old classmates. And another detail emerges. Lisa once mentioned someone following her during college. A person she couldn't identify. A vehicle she noticed more than once. A feeling she dismissed. A fear she never reported. Because nothing happened. Not yet. And that is the most terrifying part. The warning signs existed. But they were invisible until after the crime. The task force now believes the suspect spent years learning Lisa's routine. Her schedule. Her relationships. Her habits. He knew when she worked. When she came home. Who she called. The final phone call was not an accident. It was the final piece of a plan. But there is one question investigators cannot answer. Why did he allow the call to happen? Why didn't he stop her immediately? Why did he let her speak? The answer may be hidden in his psychology. He wanted control. But he also wanted to be remembered. The call became his contradiction. The thing that exposed him. The thing that connected him to a crime he believed was perfect. And that contradiction becomes the key. Because people who crave control often create their own weaknesses. They want power. But they also want recognition. They want to disappear. But they want someone to know they existed. And, eventually, that need creates mistakes. The new investigation focuses on his movements after leaving the house. Credit records. Transportation cameras. Old contacts. Former workplaces. Every path narrowed. Every possibility removed. Until one location remains. A rural property outside the city. Registered under another identity. A place purchased years earlier. Never officially connected. Investigators approach carefully.
No lights. No vehicles.
No obvious signs of life. But inside, they find evidence that someone has been there recently.
A chair.
A half-empty bottle of water. Fresh footprints near the back entrance. He was there. Recently. Maybe hours earlier. Maybe minutes. And then they discover something that changes the urgency again. A wall. Covered in photographs. Not old photographs. New ones. Recent. The same method. The same distance. The same perspective. Someone being watched. The investigators freeze. Because this means the pattern isn't ending. It's moving. And on the center of the wall, one photograph. A woman. Still alive. Still unaware. The next victim. A countdown has begun. The search becomes a race. No longer about proving what happened 30 years ago.
About stopping what is happening now.
Teams spread out. The photograph is analyzed. Location identified. Routine reconstructed. Every second matters. Because they know the pattern. They know how it begins. Observation. Preparation. Isolation. Then silence. The same silence that followed Lisa Carter's final call. But this time, they have something they never had before. A face. A name. A direction. And somewhere in the city, the man who spent decades believing he controlled every move finally realizes something. The people chasing him are no longer looking backward. They're looking directly at him. For the first time, he is not watching. He is being watched. And that changes everything. Because a predator who feels untouchable is dangerous. But a predator who knows he is cornered is unpredictable. The clock continues. The photograph remains. The victim is still out there. And the question hanging over the investigation is no longer whether they will find him. It is whether they will find him before he disappears again. The photograph changes the entire operation. For decades, investigators chased a ghost. A man without a face. A suspect without a name. A shadow hidden behind forgotten evidence and unanswered questions. But now, for the first time, they know exactly what he does before he disappears. They know the pattern. They know the preparation. And most importantly, they know someone is next. The photograph becomes the center of everything. Every pixel examined. Every reflection analyzed. Every possible clue extracted. Investigators search for anything that can reveal where the image was taken. A building. A street sign. A window reflection. A landmark. Something. Anything. Because the photograph is not just evidence. It is a countdown. The woman in the image has no idea she has been selected. That is what terrifies investigators most. She is living normally,
Going to work.
driving familiar roads, following routines, while somewhere in the darkness, someone has already studied her life. The same way he studied Lisa Carter. The same way he studied every victim before her. The task force moves quickly. But they cannot release the photograph publicly. Not yet. Not without risking panic. Not without risking the suspect seeing the investigation's hand. Because there is one thing they now understand about him. He watches. He waits. He reacts. A single mistake could give him enough time to vanish forever. The woman is identified within hours. Her name is Emily Ross. 31 years old. A medical assistant. No criminal history. No known connection to the suspect. Another ordinary life. Another person who never realized she had entered someone else's plan. Detectives quietly begin surveillance. Not of the suspect. Of the target. Every movement monitored. Every routine mapped. Not because she is under suspicion. Because she is the only person who can lead them back to him. And then, the first sign appears. A vehicle.
Dark.
Older model. Seen near her workplace. No clear plate. No direct connection. But the timing is too perfect. Investigators immediately compare it with old reports. Lisa's case. The warehouse. The storage units. The abandoned properties. The same type of vehicle appears repeatedly. Not always the same car. But the same strategy. Anonymous transportation. Easy to abandon. Easy to replace. A vehicle designed not to be remembered. The team begins following the car. But the driver notices. Not immediately. Not dramatically. Just enough. A change in behavior. A route altered. A stop made for no reason. The kind of movement that says one thing. He knows. The suspect does not speed away. He does not panic. He simply changes. Like he has done before. The surveillance team loses him for 17 minutes. Only 17. But 17 minutes is enough. When they locate him again, the car is empty. Parked near an old industrial road. The driver gone.
No witnesses. No cameras. No trace.
Again. The same impossible disappearance. The same frustration. But this time, something is different. They are not looking at a cold case anymore. They are watching a living investigation unfold. And living investigations have consequences. The abandoned vehicle is processed. Inside, they find almost nothing.
No fingerprints.
No obvious evidence. But hidden beneath the passenger seat. A small recording device. Old-fashioned.
Portable.
Still functioning. The device contains hours of audio. Not conversations. Not confessions. Just sounds. Footsteps. Doors opening. Traffic. Breathing. At first, investigators believe it is useless. Until they hear a familiar sound. Metal. A faint chain movement. Recorded recently. The same rhythm. The same pattern. The same signature that haunted Lisa Carter's final call. The connection is undeniable. But then another sound appears. A voice. Not the suspect. Someone else. A woman. Emily. The recording was made near her home. He had been close. Very close. Close enough to record her daily life. close enough to hear her without her knowing. The investigation turns urgent. Because this is no longer preparation. It is proximity. They rush to Emily's location. But when they arrive, she is gone. The house is unlocked. The lights are on.
Her phone sits on the table.
A half-finished meal remains in the kitchen. A familiar scene. A terrible scene. Because they have seen it before. 1995. Lisa Carter. The same unnatural stillness. The same feeling that someone left only moments before. But this time, they are not 30 years too late. They are minutes behind. The search begins immediately. Roadblocks. Units dispatched. Helicopters deployed. Every possible exit monitored. The suspect has changed the game. Before, he disappeared after the crime. Now he is moving while they're watching, which means he is taking risks. And risk creates mistakes. Inside Emily's home, investigators find something unexpected. A message. Not written. Not spoken.
Placed.
A photograph. Lisa Carter. From 1995. Next to a photograph of Emily. Two women. 2 decades apart. Same position. Same distance. Same style of image. The message is clear.
To him.
They are connected. To investigators. This was never random. The suspect built a world where every victim existed as part of the same story. A story only he understood. The psychological profile becomes darker. He does not simply remove people. He preserves moments. He creates connections that exist only inside his mind. And Lisa Carter was the first chapter. Not the last. The team returns to the old evidence. The notebooks. The photographs. The recordings. And they notice something they missed before. A pattern in the dates. Every major event follows a cycle. Observation. Preparation.
Capture.
Silence. Then years of waiting. But the waiting periods are changing. Getting shorter. The time between victims is shrinking. He is becoming more confident. More active. More careless. And that makes him more dangerous. The suspect who spent decades hiding is now exposing himself. Because something inside him has changed. He is not satisfied with disappearing anymore. He wants recognition. He wants investigators to know. He wants them to follow the trail. Because in his mind, the chase is part of the game. The team realizes the only way to stop him is to understand what he wants. Not just where he goes.
Why?
They revisit every victim. Every location. Every choice. And slowly, a disturbing truth appears. All of them had something in common. Not appearance. Not occupation. Not age. Something deeper. They represented moments. Transitions. Times when their lives were changing. Lisa was preparing to graduate. Another victim had started a new job. Another had moved alone for the first time. He didn't choose weakness. He chose transformation. Moments when people were rebuilding themselves. Because that was when they were easiest to observe. Easiest to enter. Easiest to control. The team now understands his method. He doesn't take people from their comfort. He takes them during change. During uncertainty. During moments when new faces appear and old routines disappear. And Emily. Emily had just moved into a new apartment. A new beginning. A new life. The exact moment he looks for. The search continues through the night. Rain begins falling. The city becomes a blur of lights and shadows. Every second feels heavier. Because somewhere out there, Emily is waiting. The suspect is moving. And investigators are following a trail that began with a 32-second phone call decades earlier. A voice that should have disappeared. A case that should have remained unsolved. But now the past is speaking. And the message is clear. The same man who silenced Lisa Carter is still trying to write the ending. But this time, someone is chasing him toward it. The rain covers the city. It hides movement. It blurs faces. It turns every street into a maze of reflections and shadows. The perfect environment for someone who spent decades learning how to disappear. But this time, he is not disappearing into the past. He is moving through the present. And somewhere in that darkness, Emily Ross is still alive. At least, that is what investigators believe. Because unlike Lisa Carter's case in 1995, they have something they never had before. A trail that is still warm. A pattern that is still unfolding. And a suspect who has finally made the mistake of showing his hand. The search expands across the county. Every road monitored. Every abandoned property checked. Every location connected to his previous movements reopened. The old warehouse. The storage units. The rural property. Places that once seemed like fragments of unrelated crimes now form a map. A map of obsession. A map of control. And at the center of it, one man. The investigators know his habits now. They know he avoids crowded places. They know he prefers forgotten spaces. Places where people pass by without looking. Places where time slows down. But they also know something else. He always returns to places connected to his memories. He does not erase the past. He preserves it. That becomes the key. If he is holding Emily somewhere, it will not be random. It will be meaningful. A place connected to something only he understands. Detectives return to his history. Not the criminal history. The personal history. The childhood. The forgotten years. The moments before he became a name in a case file. And they discover something hidden. A property. A house that belonged to his family decades earlier. A place never connected to the investigation because records showed it had been abandoned. But when they check again, something is wrong. The property was supposed to be empty. But recent utility activity appears in the records. Small amounts. Almost invisible. Electricity. Water. Enough for someone staying there temporarily. The team moves immediately. No media.
No announcements. No mistakes.
The old house sits at the end of a narrow road surrounded by trees. The kind of place where sound disappears. The kind of place where someone could scream. And nobody would hear. They approach carefully. The building looks untouched. Weathered walls. Broken windows. A structure that appears forgotten. But investigators know better now. Forgotten places are where he feels safest. The entry team moves inside. The air is cold. Heavy. The rooms are empty. Too empty. And then, a sound. A faint movement from below. A basement. A place not shown on original property records. The door is locked. Forced open. And inside, they find the history. Not evidence of one crime. Evidence of a lifetime. Walls covered with photographs.
Notes. Maps. Dates. Names.
A private museum of obsession. Lisa Carter. Emily Ross. And dozens more. Some identified, some unknown. The investigators finally understand the scale. This was never a single case. Never one disappearance. It was a collection. A lifetime project. And in the center of the room,
A chair. A camera.
and a recording device. Still running. The screen flickers. A live feed. For a moment, nobody moves. Because the impossible becomes possible. He is watching.
Right now.
The suspect is not hiding from them. He is observing them. The room becomes a trap. Not physically. Psychologically. Because the message is clear. He wanted them to find this place.
He wanted them to see it.
The question is why. Then the monitor changes. A video begins. The suspect appears. Older now.
Calm.
Sitting in a dark room.
No panic. No anger. No desperation.
Just control. He looks directly into the camera. Almost as if he is looking directly at the investigators. And then he speaks. The first clear recording of his voice. After decades of silence. His words are quiet. Measured. Almost ordinary. He does not confess. He does not explain. He talks about being misunderstood. About people forgetting. About how every person leaves behind a pattern. A trace. A story. The investigators listen carefully. Because hidden inside his words is something more important. A location. A clue. A mistake. He mentions something from his past. A place where everything started. Not where Lisa disappeared. Earlier. Before anyone knew his name. The investigators search old records again. And they find it. A property connected to him before 1995. A location that was removed from his history. A place where he lived briefly. A place where neighbors reported strange activity. A place never searched. Because nobody knew to look. The team moves. But before they leave, another discovery changes everything. On the basement wall. A calendar.
Current.
Marked with dates. One date circled.
Tonight.
The same night. The night they are already searching.
But why?
What is happening tonight? And then they realize. Emily is not just a victim. She is part of the final stage. He did not choose her because of opportunity. He chose her because of timing. Because her disappearance would force the investigation to come full circle. Lisa Carter. 30 years earlier. Emily Ross.
Now.
Two names connected by one final message. The team races to the second location. The old property. The place where everything supposedly began. But the suspect is already ahead. When they arrive, the door is open. The lights are on. And inside, a phone is ringing.
An old landline.
The same type of phone Lisa used in 1995. Nobody wants to answer. Because everyone knows what it represents. A memory. A warning. A connection. But they pick it up. Silence. Then breathing. The same breathing. 30 years later. The same controlled rhythm. Then a whisper. Not from Emily. From him. You always arrive after. The line cuts. And for a moment, the entire investigation freezes. Because that sentence reveals the truth. This was never just about hiding. It was about winning. He wanted them close. But never close enough.
He wanted the chase.
The attention. The feeling of control. But every game eventually reaches an ending. And his biggest mistake was believing the ending belonged to him. Because now investigators understand something important. He has spent 30 years repeating the same pattern. The same locations. The same symbols. The same mistakes. And repetition leaves evidence. The old property is searched. Not quickly. Not emotionally.
Carefully.
Because somewhere inside, there is a clue he believes they will miss. But this time, they know exactly what to look for. Not what is visible. What is repeated. The same details. The same habits. The same signature. And, beneath the floorboards, they find something. A hidden compartment. Inside, a final notebook. Different from the others. No victim names.
No dates.
Just one sentence written on the first page. A sentence that explains everything. I was never trying to disappear. The investigators stare at the words. Because they finally understand. He wasn't hiding from being found. He was waiting to be understood. And now, for the first time, they understand him. The question is whether they are too late. Because somewhere in the darkness beyond the property, a vehicle starts. An engine turns over. And a figure disappears into the rain. Again. But this time, he leaves something behind. A mistake. A trace. A final piece of evidence. And that piece may finally lead them to the end of the cold case that started with one whisper. I think he's here. The years that followed did not bring peace. They brought paperwork, filing cabinets, forgotten evidence rooms, cardboard boxes marked with fading ink. Detectives retired. New detectives inherited shelves of unanswered questions instead of living witnesses. Every transfer risked another piece of the story disappearing forever. Yet one item never lost its significance. A recording, barely audible beneath layers of static. The final telephone call made by the victim only minutes before everything ended. For decades, it had been treated as little more than a heartbreaking farewell to an ordinary evening. Investigators had replayed it countless times, searching for obvious clues, listening for panic, listening for names, listening for the unmistakable sound of violence arriving. They found none of those things. What they dismissed, however, was something far quieter, something almost invisible to the technology available in 1995. Every generation of investigators believed the recording had already surrendered everything it could possibly reveal. They were wrong. The cold case unit had changed dramatically by the late 2010s. Computers capable of separating layers of background noise no longer belonged exclusively to intelligence agencies. Audio specialists had developed software designed to recover conversations from damaged surveillance tapes, emergency dispatch recordings, and decades-old cassette evidence. What once sounded like meaningless static could now be dissected frequency by frequency until hidden sounds emerged from beneath the noise. The victim's final call became part of a broader initiative to digitally preserve aging evidence before deterioration erased it forever. Nobody expected a breakthrough. The project itself was considered routine, another attempt to archive history before magnetic tape surrendered to time. The technician responsible for processing the recording had never worked the original investigation. That distance became an advantage. Unlike generations of detectives who already believed they knew every second by memory, he approached the tape without assumptions. Hours became days as software isolated voices from background interference. Air conditioning hum disappeared. Telephone line distortion weakened. Electrical hiss faded. Suddenly, sounds buried for nearly a quarter-century surfaced with startling clarity. At first, they seemed insignificant. A vehicle passing outside. A dog barking somewhere in the neighborhood. The ticking of a clock. Then something else appeared. A faint metallic impact. Seconds later, another. Not random. Rhythmic. almost mechanical. The technician increased amplification while filtering surrounding frequencies. The sound became unmistakable. Railroad crossing bells. The discovery immediately challenged the timeline investigators had accepted for years. According to the original reports, the victim's location during the call had been estimated from witness statements rather than confirmed electronically. Cellular technology in 1995 lacked precise GPS capability, leaving detectives dependent upon assumptions. If railroad crossing signals were audible during the conversation, the victim had been closer to a specific rail intersection than anyone previously believed. Maps from 1995 were retrieved. Historical train schedules were requested. Railroad companies maintained archives documenting every crossing activation down to approximate times based upon train movement. Analysts synchronized the enhanced audio with transportation records from the night of the murder. Only one freight train matched the sequence of crossing signals captured in the recording. The result narrowed the victim's location during those final minutes to an area far smaller than investigators had ever imagined. The revised location introduced another remarkable coincidence. A payphone. Forgotten in countless earlier investigations because detectives believed it lay outside the relevant search area, the payphone suddenly became critically important. Telephone company maintenance logs revealed the booth remained operational throughout 1995. More importantly, archived billing records, long thought destroyed, had survived because of unrelated corporate mergers and legal storage requirements. Investigators requested every available document. Most numbers had already vanished from memory. One had not. Minutes before the victim placed the final call, another outgoing call had originated from the same payphone. The destination belonged to a business located miles away. The business itself no longer existed, but ownership records still did. Detectives traced former employees. Most remembered nothing. One remembered everything. He described a regular customer who frequently used nearby public telephones instead of calling from home or work. Quiet. Polite.
Habitual.
Someone obsessed with avoiding records connecting him to particular locations. At the time, nobody considered that behavior suspicious. During the mid-1990s, public telephones remained common. Yet looking backward through the lens of a homicide investigation, the pattern appeared striking. The customer had one additional habit. He always drove the same pickup truck. That detail echoed through the reopened investigation like a forgotten whisper finally becoming audible. Witnesses from 1995 had reported seeing a pickup near the victim shortly before contact disappeared. Back then, thousands of similar trucks traveled Florida roads every day. Today, investigators possess something far more valuable than generalized descriptions. They possessed chronology. Telephone records.
Enhanced audio.
Historical transportation data.
Vehicle ownership archive.
The fragments no longer floated independently. They began aligning with mathematical precision. Attention shifted toward surviving registration databases. Many original state records had been digitized over the years, allowing analysts to reconstruct ownership histories once considered impossible to retrieve. One name repeatedly intersected with locations surrounding the victim's final movements. It was not enough for an arrest, but it was enough for surveillance. Enough for background investigation. Enough to reopen every forgotten interview connected to that individual. Neighbors remembered peculiar behavior after the murder. One recalled seeing the pickup truck disappear for several weeks before returning freshly repainted. Another remembered late-night construction activity behind the property shortly after widespread media coverage intensified. Others admitted they had always suspected something but never contacted authorities because they possessed nothing more than uncomfortable feelings. Detectives remained cautious. Memories evolve. Rumors spread. False certainty has damaged countless investigations. Every statement required verification. Every recollection demanded independent support. Then forensic genealogy entered the picture. Advances in DNA science had already rewritten expectations across America. Cases abandoned for 30 and 40 years suddenly reached courtrooms because microscopic biological evidence preserved impossible secrets. Investigators reviewed every surviving piece of physical evidence collected in 1995. Some samples had degraded beyond usefulness. Others remained intact under carefully controlled storage conditions. The challenge was familiar. No direct suspect profile existed inside criminal databases. Traditional comparison produced nothing. Genealogical analysis offered another path. Scientists extracted genetic information from evidence once believed insufficient for meaningful examination. Instead of searching exclusively for exact matches, they searched for relatives, distant cousins unknowingly connected through public genealogy databases. The process resembled assembling an enormous family tree beginning with strangers separated by generations. Months passed. Then a family line emerged. Not a name, a branch. Researchers eliminated hundreds of descendants through age, geography, and documented absence from Florida during 1995. The list became shorter. Then shorter still. Eventually, investigators found themselves staring at a familiar individual already occupying the reopened case file because of telephone records and reconstructed timelines. Two completely independent investigative paths had converged upon the same man. Coincidence became increasingly difficult to believe.
Surveillance intensifiée.
Investigators collected discarded DNA through legally accepted methods. A drinking cup. A tissue. An item abandoned in public. Laboratories compared contemporary samples against preserved evidence from the victim. The waiting became unbearable. For detectives. For surviving family members. For prosecutors unwilling to move without scientific certainty. For a community that had nearly forgotten the case before technology resurrected it. Then the laboratory report arrived. The probability numbers stretched beyond ordinary comprehension. The biological evidence recovered decades earlier matched the newly collected DNA with extraordinary certainty. After nearly 3 decades, the unidentified genetic profile haunting investigators finally possessed a human name. No confession had been necessary. No eyewitness had suddenly remembered the impossible. Time itself had become the prosecution's greatest ally. Everything preserved by careful evidence handling in 1995 had waited patiently for science to mature. Detectives assembled the complete investigative chronology one final time. They revisited every interview, every receipt, every archived newspaper clipping, every property record, every employment document, every surviving photograph. Nothing could be allowed to undermine what would become one of Florida's most closely watched cold case prosecutions. The final call, once dismissed as emotionally significant but investigatively exhausted, had transformed into the turning point. Not because the victim spoke the killer's name. Not because a dramatic confession echoed through the receiver. But because tiny background sounds ignored for decades quietly revealed where the victim truly was, which evidence suddenly mattered, and which forgotten records deserved another look. Sometimes justice does not arrive through dramatic revelations. Sometimes it whispers beneath static until someone finally learns how to listen. By the time investigators prepared the arrest warrant, the suspect had lived an ordinary public life for decades. Friends described reliability. Coworkers recalled professionalism. Neighbors spoke of routine conversations across fences and driveways. The contrast between everyday normalcy and the violence preserved inside laboratory reports stunned everyone who encountered the case. It forced investigators once again to confront an uncomfortable truth repeated throughout criminal history. Extraordinary crimes are often committed by individuals who spend years appearing painfully ordinary, blending into communities that never imagine evil has been living quietly beside them. The arrest unfolded without the dramatic chase so many people had imagined over the years. There were no flashing helicopters circling neighborhoods, no televised standoff, no desperate attempt to outrun justice. It happened on an ordinary day beneath an ordinary Florida sky. Investigators who had spent months reconstructing a crime from fragments of evidence approached with a quiet confidence that comes only after every question has been answered on paper long before a suspect is confronted in person. The man who had lived freely for decades was informed that he was under arrest in connection with a homicide committed back in 1995. For a brief instant, time seemed to collapse. The gap between the mid-1990s and the present disappeared. Detectives standing beside modern patrol vehicles were suddenly speaking the language of reports typed on aging computers, discussing evidence sealed inside boxes before smartphones, social media, or DNA genealogy had become part of everyday life. The victim's final phone call, once considered nothing more than a heartbreaking relic, had become one of the quiet threads leading investigators back to the truth. Combined with preserved biological evidence, painstaking record reconstruction, and advances in forensic science, it had helped expose a path that no one in 1995 possessed the tools to see clearly. News of the arrest spread with astonishing speed. Local television stations interrupted scheduled programming. Newspapers that had once carried faded black-and-white photographs of the victim now published side-by-side images separated by nearly 3 decades, one capturing a life that ended far too soon, the other showing a suspect who had aged while the case itself remained frozen in public memory. For many people who had grown up hearing whispers about the murder, the announcement felt almost unreal. The investigation had survived changing police administrations, technological revolutions, budget reductions, shifting priorities, and the retirement of nearly everyone who had first responded to the crime scene. Yet somehow the case endured, carried forward by evidence that refused to disappear and by investigators unwilling to accept that unanswered questions should remain unanswered forever. Inside the courtroom, however, the emotional weight belonged not to the suspect, but to those who had spent decades living with absence instead of certainty. Family members who had learned to navigate birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, and ordinary mornings without their loved one now faced an entirely different reality. For years, they had imagined countless possibilities. Perhaps the killer had died. Perhaps he had left the country. Perhaps justice would never arrive. Hope had become dangerous because every passing year made it seem less reasonable. When detectives finally returned with answers, those answers did not erase decades of grief. They simply changed its shape. Instead of asking who had done it, the family now faced the far more complicated task of understanding how someone could allegedly carry such a secret through so many ordinary years without ever revealing it. Prosecutors carefully presented a case built not upon speculation but upon accumulation. No single piece of evidence stood alone. Instead, each fact reinforced another until the overall picture became difficult to ignore. Historical records aligned with reconstructed timelines. Witness observations gained new meaning when viewed alongside technological analysis unavailable in the 1990s. Enhanced audio from the final telephone call helped refine location estimates. Scientific examination of preserved evidence provided objective findings that investigators decades earlier could only dream about obtaining. The case demonstrated a lesson increasingly familiar to modern forensic investigators. Cold cases are rarely solved because of one miraculous discovery. They are solved because dozens of incomplete details finally become understandable when technology catches up with evidence that has been patiently waiting. Defense attorneys challenged memories shaped by time, questioned investigative assumptions, and scrutinized every procedural step taken throughout the reopened inquiry. Such challenges were expected. Courts require extraordinary care when judging events separated from the present by decades. Witness recollections naturally fade. Records become incomplete. People move away, die, or simply forget. That reality makes physical evidence especially important. Scientific findings cannot remember incorrectly. Biological material does not become influenced by rumor or media coverage. Properly preserved forensic evidence carries the same information whether examined 1 year after a crime or 30 years later. In this investigation, the preservation of critical evidence became one of the defining reasons the case could still move forward despite the immense passage of time. The story resonated far beyond a single courtroom because it reflected something larger than one investigation. Across the United States, thousands of families continue waiting beside files labeled unsolved. Shelves inside police evidence rooms contain sealed envelopes, clothing, photographs, fingerprints, and biological samples connected to victims whose names have slowly disappeared from headlines. Every one of those boxes represents unfinished work. Every one contains the possibility that tomorrow's technology may uncover what today's investigators cannot yet see. Cases once dismissed as impossible increasingly return to life through innovations in forensic genetics, digital reconstruction, advanced imaging, and analytical software capable of finding patterns hidden within enormous collections of historical records. The Florida investigation became another reminder that time, while often the enemy of witnesses, can become an unexpected ally of science. Investigators involved in the case repeatedly emphasized that perseverance mattered just as much as technology. Evidence preserved carelessly cannot be re-examined decades later. Reports written incompletely cannot guide future detectives who inherit unfamiliar files. Every photograph taken at a crime scene, every chain of custody document, every properly labeled package may someday become the difference between permanent uncertainty and eventual accountability. The detectives who reopened the investigation often acknowledged that they succeeded partly because someone in 1995 had the discipline to preserve evidence whose future value nobody could fully appreciate at the time. Their work became a bridge spanning generations of law enforcement officers separated by decades but connected through shared commitment to the same victim. For the community, the resolution carried mixed emotions. Relief arrived alongside renewed sorrow. Residents who had once altered routines because of fear remembered the atmosphere that followed the crime, the empty streets after dark, the worried parents, the conversations whispered across fences and at school entrances. Younger generations learned about an event they had never experienced firsthand but whose consequences had quietly shaped local history. The case became part of community memory, illustrating how violence can leave scars extending far beyond the immediate victims. Even after an arrest, there remained no celebration in the conventional sense. Justice does not restore lost years. It cannot return stolen futures or erase the pain carried by those left behind. What it can offer is recognition that a life mattered enough for investigators to keep searching long after public attention faded. Perhaps the most haunting element of the entire investigation remains the final telephone call. For decades, listeners searched the recording for dramatic clues, a scream, a confession, a recognizable name. Instead, the truth hid inside ordinary sounds so subtle that earlier generations lacked the tools to isolate them. A few seconds of background noise ultimately helped reshape investigators' understanding of the victim's last known movements. It serves as a powerful reminder that evidence does not always announce its importance. Sometimes the smallest detail, ignored for years, quietly preserves the key to everything. Justice, in this case, did not emerge from cinematic coincidence. It emerged from patience, discipline, scientific progress, and the refusal to abandon a victim simply because the calendar kept moving. As the legal process continued, one reality stood above every headline and every courtroom development. The victim's voice had never identified the person responsible. It had not delivered a final accusation or solved the mystery in a single dramatic moment. Yet that last conversation endured through decades, surviving technological change, institutional turnover, and the erosion of memory. Combined with evidence preserved by investigators and interpreted through modern science, it became part of the chain that eventually led authorities to answers they had sought for nearly 30 years. In the end, the case stands not merely as the story of a crime committed in Florida in 1995, but as a testament to how determination, careful evidence preservation, and evolving forensic methods can transform what once seemed destined to remain an unsolved mystery into a pursuit of accountability that outlasted silence itself. Long after headlines fade and court proceedings conclude, the enduring lesson is impossible to ignore. Time can conceal the truth, but it does not erase it. And sometimes the quietest fragments of a forgotten night continue waiting, year after year, for someone to finally hear what they have been saying all along.